Welcome here into the News4Jags podcast. A little bit of a different look, kind of back.
I like it.
We've been working on this for a little bit. We kind of done some video stuff, and then we kind of got back to the audio, and now trying to get back to the video version of the podcast. Keep bringing you some really good content here, maybe even progress and maybe do some live things down the road as we keep working toward getting this thing just right.
Yeah, how about, shout out to our art guy, Earl, for getting all this done. It's been kind of a labor of love for him for the past year of getting set up in here. So thank you, Earl, for getting this running and going. So I know viewers have probably missed our faces for the last 6-8 months in this. But glad to be here, Jamal, and adds another element to it.
Yeah. Okay, so we're kind of working through the Jaguars offseason right now, right? So a lot of questions swirling. We got the defensive coordinator down. Josh Allen just keeps saying he wants to be in Jacksonville, but what does that really mean for him, and do they get that deal done? But overall, it's draft season.
Right.
So down the road, and I promised this last podcast, but we're going to push it down just a little bit because that one's going to be a little bit of another labor of love there. We're going to do a full offseason for you, free agency, veteran moves, plus our draft. But I think we start with the draft because Mobile was big. The Senior Bowl is always kind of a fun opportunity for players to go and move their draft stock. I really wish I'd have made it to Mobile this year, but didn't quite get down there for it. We'll see if we can get down there next year. But it really starts to shake things up. Now, the Combine's the next big one after that, but I think the look of where the Jaguars might have an opportunity to get players has changed just with this one event.
Yeah, Senior Bowl and the Shrine Bowl. I mean, this is prime real estate season for Jaguar scouts, Trent Baalke. To get there, it's a chance to really see these guys, talk to them, get to know them. And the stakes are immense for these prospects at these games. You get that NFL coaching experience in a sense. You get to know the program a little bit more. And for guys, looking like to even borrow a local guy, St. Augustine High School graduate, Austin Reed, a quarterback at Western Kentucky, it gives you a chance to kind of put your name in that conversation. Like, you can actually prove yourself and you can play in the NFL. So it's a great opportunity for our local guys at these events and also potential guys that the Jaguars could be targeting.
All right, so the Jaguars have the number 17 pick in the first round. Then they have a handful of other picks. But obviously everybody kind of focuses on the first round because it comes first, right?
Yeah.
So the Jaguars have some needs. I think we've talked about a few of them. Look, they have a need at corner, especially with the new defensive coordinator and because looking toward the future. They have a need to get bigger, stronger on the defensive line, a need to get bigger, stronger on the offensive line, maybe a need to get a big, strong, kind of physical jump ball kind of wide receiver for Trevor Lawrence. So there are some needs that they have to address. Now, some of those will get fixed in free agency because, remember, free agency comes before the draft, but there's also more than just one round in the draft. So you can't fix all of them with just one pick.
Right.
So we kind of have to figure out where the balance is. Now, this is a really good draft. I like a lot of players that are in this year's draft. So the Jaguars have a chance to get a really good player.
Yeah, and I went back and I pulled 20 mock drafts from the last, let's say, 2.5 weeks. And really starting to emerge a theme. And I think we see this year after year. You target a guy last year, offensive lineman. Edge rusher were kind of the thoughts where Jacksonville would lean towards with that first pick. Obviously, they went Anton Harrison, shored up the right side of that line. Now, these last 20 drafts, these last 20 mock drafts, so 20 available draft picks. 8 receivers taken. 6 cornerbacks. So 14 of 20. So we've seen a pretty good consensus of this. 14 of the 20 mocks have gone receiver/corner. And that, to me, is like last year with the edge rusher, pass rusher, offensive tackle. You really were targeting those two positions in the early lead-in to this. And some of these names, Brian Thomas, LSU receiver, he's been mentioned quite a few times in terms of receivers. Keon Coleman, Florida State, was mentioned a couple times. Rome Odunze from Washington, another guy who's mentioned several times. And at cornerback, Kool-Aid McKinstry was mentioned twice. Quinion Mitchell mentioned once. Nate Wiggins, Ennis Rakestraw from Missouri, and Cooper DeJean from Iowa. So there's some repetitive names that are being mentioned, but receiver of these last the last 20 mock drafts,
Mm-hmm.
receiver, defensive back, eating up the lion's share of where these pundits are thinking Jacksonville needs to address in the draft.
Which is interesting because, look, I think a lot of people that watched the Jaguars last year have been defaulting to the team has to get bigger, stronger in the trenches because that's maybe where they weren't as good at. So going wide receiver or corner is a little bit straying from that. And there was a report last week from down at the Senior Bowl that wide receiver, offensive tackle, and cornerback are what the team is considering their biggest needs this offseason. Two of those obviously address what those mock drafts are saying. Offensive tackle seems a little bit strange, but that could be indicative of maybe Cam Robinson's future with the team. So, look, I think some of those wide receivers definitely address an issue. The Jaguars need a top-shelf guy. Like, you think about it like a basketball team, they got a whole bunch of guards, and they need a center at wide receiver. And this is a deep wide receiver class, so I lean a little bit away from going wide receiver in the first round. It's just me. At least looking at the way things have been shaken out, I'm okay with corner because there's a pretty good shot that the Jaguars get the top or maybe the number 2 corner in this class just because there's so much offensive talent that's going to come off the board. If you go offensive line there, look, a guy that's not in there, and I think after his week at the Senior Bowl, Jackson Powers-Johnson, look, centers don't generally go in the top 10, but the Jaguars aren't in the top 10.
Right.
So he's right in that realm of, is it that time where that first center goes off the board? It's not out of the ordinary for one center to go in the first round when there's that kind of guy. And he seems to be that kind of guy. He had a dominant week in Mobile. I mean, look, he'd be an instant plug-and-play starter for the Jaguars. And the one thing that I think everybody will agree on is the Jaguars need blue-chip guys. They need dominant guys, no matter what the position is. And if the team believes that Jackson Powers-Johnson can be an instant starter and a blue chip, a top-level starter for them, you do it.
Yeah, and to me, this offseason is about protecting Trevor better and getting strong on that defensive, that front 6, front 7, front 8, whatever kind of format we're going to look at with Ryan Nielsen. But I think you've got to invest in protecting Trevor. This year we saw the injuries mount up, the shoulder, the concussion, the ankle, knee. I mean, he was just banged up. And that resulted in being sacked a career high in the NFL. He missed a game to injury, this first game he's missed due to injury in college or NFL. You've got to get better at protecting your most valuable asset. And again, I think a big-time receiver helps that, but also that offensive line, because the offensive line was terrible. And I think you have a little bit of uncertainty with the Cam Robinson issue, which we'll probably get to in a future podcast. Yeah. You bring back Cam, restructure him, and that, in a sense, is admitting you kind of failed in the Walker Little assignment. You've got to have – to me, I think you've got to bring back Cam just with that instability. I think you've got to, as you said, maybe think about picking a center early. And that, I mean, is 17 too high for center? Well, not if you value Trevor Lawrence and his long-term health. Luke Fortner was regressed significantly this past season. And really, if you look at that offensive line, Brandon Sheriff is a guy you probably can't get rid of right now just due to that enormous dead money hit and gaping hole that it would leave. Again, he may be another restructure candidate. But, yeah, I think you've got to go into this offseason and say, we need to protect and invest in our most valuable asset who's going into year 4. Mm-hmm. He had a terrible season last year in terms of injuries and being banged up. And the offensive line was a result of Trevor's struggles, his issues that he had. So I do think you've got to invest in getting Trevor better. And if that's a center at 17, I think you do it.
Look, here's the one thing with Jackson Powers-Johnson. At the rate he's going, if they don't take him there, he's not going to be there in the second round. I mean, they'd have to trade up to go get him. He seems to be that kind of player. I mean, he had that kind of dominant week in Mobile. And I know he's kind of been a player that at least Jaguars Twitter had kind of latched on to, saying, go get this guy, maybe just because they were sick of Luke Fortner, which is understandable. The dude had a rough year, so it's time to upgrade that position and help Trevor Lawrence out somewhere along the lines. Is it there? Here's the one thing I want to throw at you, because as I've gone through these, because I really like some of the mock draft simulators as I start to go through players just to throw different scenarios at me. Some players sometimes fall to you that you don't think are necessarily in that realm or even in positions that you don't think. What about an edge rusher in round 1?
Yeah. Hey, I would have liked an edge rusher in round 1 last year.
So,
and it did not materialize.
Here's my question, and this is something we've talked about, and I think we're in consensus on what the Jaguars should do. But what are they going to do is the better question that I think we try and lean toward a lot of times when we talk about stuff. Josh Allen, free agent, probably going to get franchise tagged because he's due for a big payday.
Right.
Say they franchise tag him just for sake of conversation. You go into the draft with a guy on a 1-year contract, probably not that happy that he's on this 1-year contract. Do you draft his replacement if the top edge rusher in the class falls to you, which is a legitimate possibility?
Absolutely. I think you've got to, bigger in the trenches, stronger, and if you add that edge rusher, I think that's another one. But I do think you have to pay attention to, and we're kind of skipping past free agency and everything at this point.
Yeah.
So I think you've got to get better trenches. You've got to protect Trevor better. But again, flip side, same thing as last year. You needed a pass rusher. You needed a guy who could get to the quarterback. We saw Josh Allen take that massive step forward this past season. You saw Trayvon Walker take a step forward. But, again, as you sign Josh Allen to a long-term deal, as you pay these guys on their second contract, they become less cost-effective. Josh Allen was cap-controlled for the first 5 years of his deal.
Right.
And now you're going to pay Josh Allen. Let's just say he gets franchise tag. He's going to be making $21 million. So, and if you re-sign Josh Allen, he's going to be making a lot more money. You can break it down a little bit better if you have that that long-term deal built in. You have the autonomy to kind of push some of that salary and the dead cap and all that stuff out into future years. So, if you can get a blockbuster pass rusher to pair with Josh Allen and Trayvon Walker, I think you do it. And I think maybe free agency you explore an offensive line, an offensive guard, a better center than what you've got now.
Look, there's a legitimate chance that Laiatu Latu from UCLA is there. And it's partially because of some of the medicals. He's probably not going to test crazy at the combine, but the production in college for this dude has been absolutely ridiculous. I think the Jaguars' need at pass rushers changed a little bit. Look, with the emergence of Trayvon, you don't really want to take him off the field. If you're keeping Josh, you say, okay, these are our 2 edges. They still need a third edge because you need 3 decent pass rushers, and right now they're searching for that guy, whether it's a 2 years removed from the AC or Achilles, Dewan Smoot, who is also a free agent, or whether it's another free agent that they bring in, Yasir Abdullah, who they drafted last year. Those are question marks. But they need a third pass rusher. But where their need in pass rush is right now is they got to find a 3 technique.
Right.
I don't want to say a 3 technique. They have to find an interior pass rusher.
Absolutely.
Someone who can give them some push, ideally some penetration. So that way the quarterback doesn't have all that area to step up into that we saw last year. Some sort of interior pass rush. Now, also good news, this draft has multiple guys at that defensive tackle spot that do that as a trade. That is what they made their name for. They're going to be there. Maybe some of them will be probably on the board in the first round. Some of them, at least one. And then they have some guys farther down the board that they could get on day 2, maybe even day 3 that could help there. The problem is, as I go through some of these defensive tackle guys, they're not Trent Baalke guys. Trent is a size, long arms kind of guy. And I understand it because, look, at the end of the day, if you look at defensive line, generally it is the biggest, strongest, fastest guys that find a way to be successful in the NFL. But some of these guys have what it takes, but they're just not in some of those height or arm length spots for a Trent Baalke.
Let me ask you this.
Okay.
Best case scenario.
Yes.
Who are you taking at 17?
Best case scenario. When you say best case scenario.
Best case scenario at 17. You figure 4 quarterbacks could be gone at that point.
Yep.
So you're talking maybe your top 12, 13 guys in the draft are going to be there. I mean, is there a Brock Bowers situation where he falls that far and you can draft an Evan Ingram replacement? Is it Jared Verse? Is he a guy that if he's there, you bolster the pass rush, you get maybe a poor man's Brian Burns to pair with Josh Allen? I mean, what's your best case scenario at 17 for the Jags?
I think best case scenario is one of these top offensive linemen fall somehow, some way, whether it's Fuaga from Oregon State or Fashanu from Penn State. If for some reason one of those top offensive linemen fell, and some of these guys are tackles by trade, and some of them can slide inside, but if one of those top offensive linemen fell, I think that'd be a spot where the Jaguars could really find a way to take advantage of, bolster the offensive line in a different way. But I think some of that is unrealistic. I think realistically, at least the way the draft is shaping up right now, the Jaguars are going to have their pick of probably the top center on the board, probably one of the top 2 or 3 defensive ends or outside linebackers. So probably Jared Verse might be there, but he's probably gone. Dallas Turner's probably gone. But at least one of them's probably on the board. You probably have a wide receiver that you feel decent about that's hanging around. And the cornerback position is one that's going to slide a little bit just because of
the abundance of them.
Yeah, the abundance of them too. So it's going to be interesting. I mean, if Jerzon Newton's sitting on the board, I know for whatever reason people have gotten a little tired of him. He's not as hot of a name right now, but I'd jump at the opportunity to get Jerzon Newton in the defense. Defensive lineman from Illinois. But, again, not a Trent Baalke guy, so probably not on his board. But I think some of the names that we're really going to end up diving deep into, Quinyon Mitchell from Toledo, fantastic Senior Bowl, crazy athlete. The only knock they're going to say on him is the level of competition. Right. He played at Toledo. But he went down in the Senior Bowl, did everything he could. Supposedly he's going to test like a freak at the Combine, so his stock's going to soar through the roof. Terrion Arnold from Alabama, he's going to be around. Kool-Aid McKinstry, you mentioned. Of course, Jackson Powers-Johnson. Brian Thomas is going to be in there. Right now, nobody's talking about the pass rusher. That's why I wanted to throw it out there. Because I just think I'm skeptical when you get to this point with a guy like Josh Allen, and he did everything you wanted him to do. He's been a good teammate. He's been a captain. He stepped away, said, I got to go focus on me. Went and did it. Went and set a franchise record. And you say he's going to be a Jaguar next year. And maybe if you want to read into it, he said he's going to be a Jaguar next year, not he's going to be a Jaguar for a long time.
So he knows the franchise tag is coming.
The franchise tag is probably coming. So he's going to franchise tag this guy. And generally, you franchise tag a guy, and if you're a very good and well-run team, then you get his replacement. Because you franchise tag him.
Yeah. We talked about this last year.
We talked about
this for the draft because you were in the theory of maybe Josh doesn't come back next year.
And that was one of the things.
He's been kind of an enigma in Jacksonville. He's had a great rookie year. Yep. He's kind of had this up and down, and Josh is going to get paid in free agency. I mean, this is going into year 5. Somebody is going to look at Josh Allen and say, this guy's first-round pick, top 10 pick. He's long. He just hasn't been coached well in Jacksonville. Sky's the limit. Here's a $120 million contract. Somebody was going to do that.
Yes.
And, that's what we're thinking. Draft a guy in the first, second, third round and develop him. And we had this conversation on this podcast before. Jacksonville needs to draft and develop. And, the first pass rush pick came in round 3, right, with Abdullah last year. So you didn't really –
No, he was 5th round.
5th round? Okay, so –
Cyr Abdullah was a 5th-round pick where they finally said, guess we should get some help.
So, to me, that you can't do that. So, yeah, you draft a replacement. If you're drafting a guy in the first round, a pass rusher, that tells me you're thinking Josh Allen is not going to be here long term.
Right. If they do that, that says, Josh, this is basically your walking papers. You're a one-year rental. You're not in the long-term plans. I think they should pay Josh. I think they got to keep their guys, especially when guys want to be in a Jaguar, want to be in Jacksonville. You got to keep those guys. You got to keep the guys you draft. Draft and retain, not just draft and develop. So I think they're missing the retain part right now. So I'd pay Josh. That's what I'd do. But if I don't know if he's a Trent Baalke guy. Trent didn't pick him. Remember, that was a Dave Caldwell pick. So Trent could 100% be on the edge on whether Josh is worth the sort of contract that he's demanding right now. And understandable. Look, Juwan Taylor, they didn't end up ponying up for him, even though they did want to keep him. And maybe the Chiefs, they're in the Super Bowl, but look, Juwan's had his struggles with them this year. So maybe the Jaguars are sitting there looking like, well, that's why we didn't want to pay that guy the big money. So, look, I can understand it. If the plan is you're going to franchise tag Josh Allen, shop him around the deadline, possibly keep him next season, then yeah, looking for a Jared Verse, looking for a Leatu Latu, looking for a Dallas Turner could make a whole lot of sense to get that in-house replacement for him in the building, you've got your 3 pass rushers for next year where you feel pretty good because now you got Josh, you got Trayvon, you're going to let them roll out. And your first round pick, he's a rotational guy who maybe doesn't get as many snaps as you'd like, but he comes in, plays, and if he starts playing better, maybe you trade Josh at the deadline.
Right.
Maybe you just let him walk at the end of the year. Whatever it is, now you have that built-in. It's not throw a rookie to the fire. This guy got used to the NFL, showed he can play, and now you get a chance to give him the bigger role.
Yeah, it's possible, and I think that's what good teams do. And the Jaguars have not been one of those good teams historically in terms of being able to draft, develop, and retain. I mean, you drafted Jalen Ramsey, you did well with him. He wanted out of town. You drafted Unique. Great. I mean, Unique had excellent time. I mean, remember, Unique was in this class with Dante Fowler, the number 3 overall pick in the draft, and Dante was awful in Jacksonville. And, he was a spot guy. He started maybe 1 or 2 games in his entire Jaguars career, and Unique was a guy in that class who outperformed the number 3 pick in the draft. So, and Unique has obviously gone on to make more money and be an impact player in the NFL, other stops in Jacksonville, but Jacksonville has just not historically drafted, developed, and, as Jamal mentioned, retained those guys. You like to see me. Devon Hamilton was a draft, develop, retain, and he strughed last year. 9 games he played in, and
we'll give him a pass though.
Yeah, he had a back infection that was bad, and DeJuan Smoot is a guy who's draft, develop, and retain. He's again coming off an injury and probably wasn't back to full strength last year, so that's another guy who could be in that pass rush equation. But you're right. I mean, draft, develop, and I think if you draft him in a pass rusher in the first round, and you got Josh on the franchise tag, I do think that's probably an ominous sign for Josh's career beyond the franchise tag season, which we're probably going to see in 2024 in Jacksonville.
And you mentioned Unique. Isn't that the situation where Josh got here? Jan was on the tag.
Right.
They drafted Josh Allen. Jan played on the tag, and then Jan was gone.
Right.
That's just how teams operate. I mean, we can go through example after example. It'll at least be something to put in the realm of perspective as we gear towards this thing. To keep in mind, if they tag this dude, and the other thing we don't know is, will Josh want to play on the tag? How long does he miss saying, I don't want to play on this tag? Surely, without a doubt, last year was so great for him that I can't imagine he's going to be at the offseason program. So he's going to miss all that, so you don't see him until training camp anyway.
Right.
So now you say, all right, well, I'm not going to see you till training camp. Let's say he doesn't want to play on the franchise tag. So he skips camp.
Right.
All right, let's say now he's still upset. Does he skip a week? Does he skip 2 weeks? Does he show up on game day for the first game just so he doesn't miss a game check? What does he do? Those are questions that we don't know, and that him and his agent will have to dive into if that is what the Jaguars ultimately decide to do. So that's just the if. That's just the conspiracy theory. And look, I think the draft is going to shake out to where one of those guys is hanging out, so it would be a good value pick for the Jaguars. But ultimately, like right now, if I had to lean, I think it's more likely they go corner than anything else, just because I think there's going to be some good corners there.
Yeah, and I totally agree. I think they will probably lean. I think 17 is probably too early in their mind for that big-bodied receiver. I'd like to see him get one. But, again, you have all these laundry lists of items in the offseason that you'd like to do. And, hey, who's to say they don't go out and get T. Higgins? They won't. But you could do something like that and fill that need in the offseason. But, yeah, you have a laundry list of things. And in the grand scheme of things, what is more important to Jacksonville going into 2024? You've got to protect Trevor better. You've got to get stronger at the line. You've got to have that third cornerback, not named Trey Herndon, who is going to be able to play that man defense that Ryan Nielsen likes to run. So you've got 2 corners now, Tyson and Darius, who can do that.
Look, and there's no promise about Darius.
Yeah, that's true. Because he could be gone.
He would save a whole lot of money on the cap.
Right.
No
but
promise.
He's been your most effective corner, consistent corner. I mean, Tyson had a very checkered 2024 with the up and down with the injuries and stuff. It was as a step back for Tyson. And Darius was, again, he was their most consistent corner. So, yeah, it is a money issue with Darius. I mean, he could be a guy that comes back on the restructure.
Right.
Again, he's on the wrong side of 30 when this season starts. So that's another issue to kind of take into account. But, I would like to see Jacksonville get a big-bodied receiver this offseason, be it in free agency or the draft, and get him on a high pick. I don't want a guy like Jalen Camp or whoever, the receiver of Georgia Tech. You know, I mean,
that's him, 7th-round pick.
So, I mean, guys
Urban
like that.
Meyer
I
year.
want to see a guy that comes in that's a first-round, second-round guy and makes that impact. I mean, some of Jacksonville's best picks in franchise history have been second-round guys. You look at Rasheen, you look at Mojo, those guys. You can find those guys in the draft, and Jacksonville just historically has not done it. Get bigger, stronger, and faster, and I think that's offensive line. I think that's that third corner type of player who can play that man press defense that Ryan Nielsen will want to run.
And look, that's one of the interesting things about this year's draft is, like, the past couple of years we've said, oh, it's a good receiver draft, but it's been a lot of, like, smaller guys, a lot of slot guys. This year, there's so many big body guys, like Keon Coleman coming out of Florida State. His people seem to think he's going to test like an animal at the combine and just blow people out of the water. But, I mean, Florida State fans saw what Keon can do at times, and so he's sliding a little bit just because there's so many receivers. In any given year, Keon could be the top receiver in a class. But with Marvin Harrison Jr., with the Malik Neighbors, I mean, it's understandable. They're dudes in this class. So, look, Keon Coleman's going to be there. He's a big body guy. I mean, Xavier Legit, he had a 1 year kind of season for him. So, or in South Carolina, he was a big guy who could do some things in the NFL that people are going to be excited about. There are a handful of other ones. I really like Adonai Mitchell from Texas. He's a guy that he went to Georgia. Justin's a Georgia guy.
That's right.
He was a Georgia Bulldog, went to Texas last year, and he is a big body. He has speed. I think he's going to slide a little bit, again, just because there's so many people in this draft. I really like him for maybe a second-round pick that gives you that taller receiver who can go up and get it. I mean, I like Brennan Rice, too, Jerry Rice's son. Hey, NFL bloodlines never – you can't go too wrong with that, and all of a sudden the Jags got Jerry hanging out at games. That's not bad.
That's right.
So there are some guys – there are definitely some taller receivers hanging out in this year's class that would make sense. And, look, there was a guy so he was in the Senior Bowl last week, Malachi Corley. I was kind of on the fence about him. From Western Kentucky, hung out with Austin a little bit. But Malachi had a monster week at the Senior Bowl.
He had a lot of good reviews.
Oh, my goodness.
Yes, a lot of them.
And the thing coming out of college is, like, Bag was that maybe he's not as refined as a receiver. And he's not the big body type that the Jaguars need. But if they did want to stay in that realm of maybe the Jamal Agnews, who's also a free agent, if they want to replace Jamal Agnew and keep that kind of gadget player on offense for a guy who has huge upside, Malachi Corley would be dynamic.
And, hey, Jamal was on the Tyjae Spears train, the Jahmyr Gibbs train. I mean, Jamal has been on some of these not prototypical kind of guys. Rashee Rice, another guy you liked. But, yeah, I mean, and those guys have had phenomenal stints in the NFL. And can you imagine what that would look like in Jacksonville? Jacksonville got a ton of just these undersized Calvin Ridley, Christian Kirk, Jamal Agnew kind of bodies. Zay Jones. These are not big guys. I mean, you can stand next to these guys at training camp, and you get a really good glimpse on how moderately sized this Jaguar receiving corps. I mean, unless you're looking at like an Elijah Cooks or somebody who's got a little bit of size on him, but he's not a main guy. I mean, you look at the Christians, the Jamals, the Zays. These guys are like you and I kind of size. I mean, these guys are not 6'4", 6'5" monsters, and that's what you get with a Coleman. Or, you know, the knock on the Western Kentucky guys, his route tree wasn't as polished as some of coming out of college. But, again, you playing that pro-style kind of offense, you're going to learn quick, and you see at the Senior Bowl, this guy comes out there, he's an unheralded kind of guy who may have been a day two pick, and you come out of that Senior Bowl thinking, this guy could sneak into maybe day one.
Maybe.
Yeah.
And that's the thing. And one of the things that the Jaguars need, and they've used Jamal Agnew in this role so many times, is, like, if you need you need yards after catch, who are you going to right now? I mean, right now, I'd say, like, maybe Christian Kirk's your best yards after catch guy, but I would say that's not his, like, best skill. Who's your yard after catch guy?
Probably Calvin.
Probably Calvin.
Yeah.
I mean, but so you see what I'm saying?
Yeah.
So and that's what Malachi Corley would be really good at. When he gets the ball in his hands, it's a different gear. He changes. And at the Senior Bowl, he looked like a guy who was on a mission to show people, like, I'm a receiver too. and I want to do some of these things. And, I mean, he was bullying some of them DBs. Guys were lined up across from him. He's throwing them. Looked like some of the George Pickens plays we've seen where he just throws the DB. So, and he's just not a big guy. So that's impressive to see when he gets a chance to go against some of these higher level of competition guys, and we already know what he can do with the ball in his hands, that he can hang. So there's some receivers in this class that if the Jaguars did decide to make the pick, you feel pretty good about. Like this one, I feel like it's going to be really tough for them to draft a receiver this year and us just go, what are you doing? Like, even if they don't go the big receiver, I think big receiver is what you want, ideally, if one of the big body guys. But, like, Ricky Parasol from Florida, he's pretty good.
Yeah.
He's pretty good.
Ladd McConkey?
Ladd McConkey is fantastic.
He is amazing.
I covered him for like a year or two in high school before I got to Jacksonville because he went to North Murray. But he is fantastic.
He's good.
Xavier Worthy from Texas is really good. There's a couple of other guys in this year's draft that if you get them later, you're like, I could work with this. And they're
you're
not
going to be able to
guys.
get a Ladd McConkey type in that second round.
100%.
You're going to be able to get a guy like that. With the receiver depth in this year's class, I mean, again, I know people always see, and we are guilty of it as anybody, you see these big-ticket guys in free agency, the T. Higgins, the Mike Evans. Jags aren't going to get one of those guys.
No,
historically, they've just not done that. But you can get that guy in the second round of the draft, and the depth of receivers this year, to me, it almost reminds me of tight ends last year. There were so many good tight ends where you were going to be able to get that good guy in round two, and there was kind of that rush on tight ends.
The good guy in round two, you say. The good guy in round two, you say.
Jacksonville did not get the good tight end in round two. But, I know Sam Laporta was one of your guys.
He was.
I mean, there were guys that you're thinking, Michael Mayer was my guy. You're thinking, man, you could get these guys in round two. And receivers, to me, are like the tight ends from 2023 where there were just so many tight ends in that draft where you're going to get that good guy in round two. Jacksonville obviously swung and missed on their tight end in round two. But, again, hopefully Brenton Strange has a bit better year. But receivers this year, to me, remind me of tight ends last year. So many, and I think you're going to be able to get a great one in round two.
Yeah, I'd manage it with that in mind. I'd say, all right, look, in round two, we're going to go with what's left at the wide receiver bucket because I think they're going to bring Calvin Ridley back somehow. So this receiver is coming in to maybe replace Zay Jones or maybe be your fourth. So I would say you look at corner, you look at the offensive line as your two. Okay, these are best player available at a position of need kind of guys. So who falls to us at corner? Who falls to us on the offensive line? How high are we on Jackson Powers-Johnson? And do we think that he's going to fit our system, be an instant plug-and-play starter day one, and does that fix the interior offensive line problems? If they think that and he's the best offensive lineman available, then maybe he's the pick.
Yeah, and you're thinking when you're drafting a center or guard in that first round, these guys are going to be able to start for 13 years. Yes. These guys are going to be that type of player. This isn't a 5-year, 4-year rental kind of thing. When you're drafting a center, a guard, you're thinking, you have that mindset where these guys are going to be with you for a long period of time. Like a Tony Baselli kind of guy. I mean, you draft that guy and you say this guy is going to be our franchise center, left tackle, right tackle. They did that with Anton. You're hoping Anton is in that mix for the next 10 years. And if you do a center, a guard in that draft that early, you're plugging and playing him. He's starting day one.
Right.
And he better be in that ring of honor by the time his career in Jacksonville's done. You take him that high.
Look, I mean, you have to fix it. They know they have to fix it, and they could go the veteran route in free agency and shore up the offensive line. I think that's more realistic than wide receiver. I think that some rentals at cornerback are very realistic. If they do have to move on from Darius, if they just decide he doesn't fit the new system, whatever it may be, I think a rental at cornerback is more realistic than a rental on the offensive line, and then maybe you do pick corner in that first round. There's going to be a corner there that's really good. Like Kool-Aid McKinstry's sliding down all these mock drafts right now. There's nothing wrong with Kool-Aid. He's just really good at one thing, playing press man coverage. Oh, guess what? Ryan Nielsen wants to play a lot of press man coverage. So, like, he would fit perfectly even if the Jaguars wanted to trade back and get Kool-Aid. Okay. So, this year's draft, really good, feel good about it. I think there's a lot of players where the Jaguars should walk away where people feel pretty good about what you're getting. Last year's draft was kind of, once you kind of got past some of it, there wasn't a ton. I think they did a good job getting Anton Harrison, their guy, trading back, getting some extra picks, even though they didn't do a ton with those extra picks.
13 picks? Bad draft.
They do not need
Bad
13 picks this year. Just get it done, get it over with, get some high-level guys. Oh, my goodness. If they go 13 picks again or something crazy, I don't know what we're going to do.
I saw ESPN did a redraft of the 2023 draft earlier today, and I just thought it was telling that you look in the first 64 picks or whatever they redrafted, only one Jag.
Anton.
Only one Jaguar.
That's it.
And Trent had 13.
Yes.
13 picks.
A lot of swings. But the NFL.com all-rookie team, Antonio Johnson, did make that. So 2 Jaguars getting some flowers. All right.
Brian Branch went higher in the mock draft. I know he was a favorite of Jamal.
He should have been the pick. I thought, well, look, I like Anton, and I think Anton was a very good pick. But Brian Branch should have been your second-round pick.
Yeah, over Brenton Strange.
Brian Branch should have been the Jaguars' second-round
Yes.
pick, and then we completely changed our tune on a lot of things. If they drafted Brian Branch and Antonio Johnson last year, they'd be sitting pretty good right now.
Then you're talking Rayshon Jenkins not coming back. Yep. That's money saved right there.
Yep.
And Brian's in the conversation for Defensive Rookie of the Year.
Yep.
And played in the NFC Championship game with the Lions. He's set there. Helped remake a terrible Lions secondary. Jags need some help in that secondary, especially with a new defensive coordinator coming in. So again, you have 13 draft picks in a draft. You better hit on a couple of those guys, and it does not look like that right now.
No, it doesn't look like they did it. So we'll see what happens. Long way to go. All right, Pro Bowl was last week. Josh Allen said twice during his trip down to Orlando that he wants to be in Jacksonville. I think he's on the franchise tag. What's your gut feeling? Do they get a deal done, or is he tagged?
I would love to see him sign Josh to a long-term deal because, A, he's going to be in Jacksonville for a little bit of time. He's going to be happy, not disgruntled. You mentioned earlier about playing on the franchise tag. Players hate playing on the franchise tag. Yeah, you get a lot of money up front, but you don't get the stability. It's only 1 year. You get hurt that year. Completely changes the trajectory of your career. I do think they probably tag him and maybe extend Calvin Ridley with a longer-term deal. So I do think Josh will probably be playing on that tag. Unfortunate for him and his agents, but I do think that's probably what happens. I think Trent Baalke, in a sense, probably what a lot of Jaguars fans feel after the season. They don't want to hand Trevor the bag after this year. They want to see him a little bit more. I think Trent's going to probably have that same mindset with Josh and his representatives. We want to see if this is more than just a one-year thing.
Well, we'll see what happens. We'll definitely be talking about Josh Allen all offseason at this rate. Franchise tag deadline is in March, right before free agency, so some decisions to be made. I think the franchise tag for Josh is like 1 year, $20 million. So definitely nothing to flinch at, but probably not the contract that he's hoping for. We'll see what happens. Thanks for hanging out with us here on the News4Jags podcast, and we'll see you next time.